time.
And now, it's time for Herman and Sharron.
I love you.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.
We're back
all
again.
You good-looking people for choosing the Christian television network to watch this program. You know, the Judeo-Christian relationship we have is so neat.
Yes, it is.
And I love that relationship. I was reading this morning. Can I share it with you?
Go right ahead.
I'm reading
I know
through,
you love Jeremiah.
I know, it's one of my favorite
It's
books.
Jeremiah.
Yeah. It's Jeremiah 31:36, and it says, I am as likely to reject my people Israel as I am to abolish the laws of nature. Let that one sink in. We have a rabbi with us.
We do. Rabbi Ken Spiro is a historian and a rabbi, and he and his wife and 5 children and two grandchildren.
He showed us pictures.
Yes, live in Israel, where he teaches at a college there, Jewish studies, but he also lectures throughout the world on Jewish history and values. And he's going to be telling us what he's doing here and what he's been traveling around doing, which is very interesting.
This book, you'll have an opportunity, because you'll see the website to get it. Right there it is on the screen. And by the way, that is a history book. I'm reading it and I'm going, wow, there's stuff in this I mean, I heard about, never knew, but good to have you.
Yes, it is.
Thanks for having me.
Wow. And stay with us, because this is going to be a different format today. So stay with us, because you can have an opportunity to have your own DVD when you go to that website and find all that you want to know about Israel inside. By the way, let me just put this up on the screen before we start, because just to let you know where I'm coming from, okay? Because it is a blessing and an honor to have you. But Dave, can you put that spot up just for me to read? And I don't know if you can see the teleprompter or the screen right here. It says, if the Arabs put down their weapons today, there would be no more violence. If the Jews put their weapons down today, there would be no more Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu said that. And I keep that literally. I mean, you can see right inside of my Bible, because that is so appropriate. And people do not realize that every time the Jewish nation gives away land, has it ever worked? Has it?
Never. I mean,
the Golan Heights, has it ever worked? I mean, all of a sudden they have bombs raining down on them like rain itself. It is just amazing. Give me your background, because we are going to bump right up against a video that you have got to see. But give me your background.
Well, first of all, I'm born and raised in the States, but I've lived for the last 31 years in Israel. And I wear a bunch of different hats. On one hand, I'm a rabbi, although I don't have a congregation. My mother told me it wasn't a great job for a Jewish boy.
Yeah.
And I'm also a historian and a tour guide and author. So in my educational approach, I spend most of my time in Israel teaching and guiding and writing, and my educational approach is to try and synthesize the two, where my biblical approach, my Jewish scriptural approach with the history, and it all fits together, because if there's a God who runs the world, then everything's part of his plan, and the real challenge is to see his hand in action in current events today and realize that it's all part of a very long story that is leading to a certain destination. And the trick is to communicate that in a way that brings both the history and the spirituality together.
Does America have any impact on what is happening in Israel?
America has tremendous impact.
Explain.
It's first of all, the Israel-America relationship has more strings attached to it than Pinocchio. It's an alliance.
I like the analogy.
Yeah, it's an alliance with, really, the only thing standing between Israel and complete political isolation in the world is the United States. If the U.S. were not to use its veto, let's say, in the Security Council, Israel could find itself completely isolated. So on that hand, we know Israel and America is the big supporter of Israel in terms of weapons and defense, and Israel is the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid. But it comes with a lot of strings attached, and that Israel is not really free to operate without the backing of the United States in wars after a certain number of days, America decides that's enough, the war basically has to stop. So it's a complicated relationship.
Yeah.
Like, that's why I say it's got a lot of strings attached. But then again, America is, in many ways, the most Bible-based country in the world.
So the president has a lot to do with the heart palpitations of what happens in Israel. In other words, one comment out of his mouth, and we that are so close to the Judeo-Christian relationship that they might say you're a little overboard. Well, that's okay. But when we hear that phrase, we go, oh, that is not good. But yet, Netanyahu cannot even voice a comment, or whether he agrees or disagrees. He's got to be that straight line, no matter if Reagan were in there or if Obama is in there. Yeah. How do you pull that off?
Well, it's a tough thing because it's not an equal relationship, really. It's Israel has sort of a subservient relationship, America being the big brother and the supplier and in many ways the defender of Israel. But thank God, it's not just the president. The president has an impact, but it's the Congress and the Senate. I always half-jokingly say the most pro-Israel body in the world is not the Israeli Knesset, the parliament in Israel, which has some people who really are not big supporters of Israel, believe it or not.
Isn't that amazing?
But it is.
Because I have heard some of their comments, and well, it's like some of the, we put it this way, it's like some of the Jews that are Democrats and what they say, and you go, wait a minute. Your whole background is Jewish. What are you saying? But you have it in Israel.
Exactly. Well, you get people who are Jewish and also the Arab Knesset members who often say these things. But the relationships are interesting in that it's really the Congress and the Senate that are, this obviously is not 100% bipartisan support. Yeah. It's less so than we've seen in a long time, but certainly that is the rock basis. And also on a deeper level, it's not just the political support. I always say America is the symbol and Israel is the source of values of Western civilization. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're always lumped together and often attacked together. And Israel's often at the front line in a much bigger struggle between the forces of evil and radicalism in the world and radical Islam. They might target Israel first because we're in their neighborhood, but really the ultimate goal is to get, as the Iranians call it, the big Satan. Israel's just a little Satan. Yeah. And I think that bedrock realization of the shared values, those Judeo-Christian ethics, as we call them, is really the basis of support.
Do you feel, walking the streets in Jerusalem, for example, the presence of God? I mean, when we were there, there's something there, because we know that Jerusalem is going to be the place, the new heaven, the new earth, it's going to be the place. But do you sense that protection by God?
Sure, I would say, I say in Israel is the word real. There's something very real about being in Israel. Yeah. That it's, there's an intensity and an energy there you don't feel anywhere else in the world. And absolutely, you kind of living there, you kind of like take it for granted after a while. But when
that's easy to do.
Yeah, but when I come back, I'm on a speaking tour now for 2 weeks. When I get back there, the energy is really very apparent.
Do you have hecklers on some of your tours?
Rarely. Usually not. Most of my audiences are self-selecting, so that people showing up. University campuses, yeah, for sure.
And that's more pervasive than like 2 years ago, isn't it?
It's getting worse and worse. It's getting much, much worse. And to represent Israel on campus is really a difficult job nowadays.
Let me just give a little shot on this book. Like I say, it is history. I mean, you will like the Romans and Greeks. I mean, if you think we've got a crazy, messed up, sexually perverse society today, you will not believe what your history book here says. I mean, it's so revealing. Now, just very quick, but like a couple of minutes, why did you put this together?
Well, I put this together because I think one of the least appreciated contributions of the Jews to the world is the values that come from relationship with God.
Yes.
And these values are so deeply ingrained in our sort of basic operating package of our brain that we don't appreciate that they're not put in there at birth. They're learned. They're values that come from a certain source. So what I wanted to do is take people back and give them a little bit different view of the ancient world than they got maybe in 6th grade, and show them that the ancient world, for all of its beauty, Greece, Rome, and many civilizations, and the culture and customs and all the things we so value, was a very brutal, callous place where almost every ancient society practiced infanticide as a means of population control or sex selection, where institutionalized inequality before the law was the norm.
And pedophilia.
Unbelievable. It's really, if people would be shocked. People
so nothing's
would,
new under the sun, is what you're saying.
the sad thing is the more we distance ourselves from relationship with God, the more the
Worse
world
it gets.
returns to that.
Yep.
Man does what he wants to in his mind.
Exactly.
And if you let the mind control you, wow,
Yeah.
you're done.
Or if it's just purely an emotional, physical, animal attraction. You know, it's a very basic belief that we have an animal part and a soul, and there's a conflict between the two, and unless you tie into the soul side.
That's why we get into the term, you guys are like a bunch of animals.
Exactly.
Because that's a correct term. Because you reverted to that lifestyle.
100%.
Yeah. You talk about slaves were the majority in Athens and Rome. And you were saying, and this amazed me, it's a history book. Slaves to citizens were 5 to 1.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Did that shock you?
I learned, when I was writing this book, it was an eye-opener for me as much as the people reading it today. I couldn't believe, the more I looked into it, the more I saw how...
The Olympics, originally a Greek religious event held in honor of Zeus at Olympia, they were conducted in the nude. Totally. and it's like, that was like we're sitting here with clothes on.
Exactly. 100%. It's amazing. Like, even standards of things like modesty, what we think is correct behavior, I always say it would shock the most open society today. How open, how promiscuous, how immodest the ancient world was. Because again, it was more that animal thing. The Greeks worshipped the physical beauty of the body.
And that's why there's so many statues that you can see obviously
and
depict that.
A good percentage of them don't have clothing on them either for
Absolutely.
that exact reason.
Well, it was interesting that Rome kind of frowned on that, and then they became accepting the very thing. I mean, is that like society today?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you frown on, like in the 50s, pornography, and now in 2013 we go, it's on your phones, it's on your TVs, it's on everything.
You see where we're kind of reverting back, little by little, to that same idea.
Well, it's a basic concept in Judaism that human nature is essentially human nature at all periods of time. And without the right spiritual forces pushing us in the correct direction, we'll just revert back to our most base animal state.
And this has been said so often that the Bible really brought freedom to women, because on chapter 5 in your book, Sex and Sensibility, in Rome, women had no identity apart from their husbands or fathers. I mean, they were like objects.
Mm-hmm. It was still that way in England back in the 1800s, I think, too. They couldn't, they weren't allowed to inherit anything.
In America, they couldn't vote.
Yeah, that's right. So it lasted a long time.
So all of this helped you in what way? I mean, this kind of history.
Well, the reason I wrote this primarily was because people think general religion is somewhat irrelevant. And I educate my major audience is Jews, young Jews, thinking Judaism is irrelevant and meaningless. And to give people a big shot in the arm of an appreciation of the relevancy of religion and spirituality and the morality that comes from religion, and how relevant the Jewish people's role in the world has been and should continue to be as a spiritual guide for the rest of the human race.
And it is amazing. You got to get your book, because it will shock you. I mean, trust me, this is not a book on the Bible. It's a book on what happens when we don't follow the Word of God.
That's right.
And we do what is right in our own eyes. It's an eye-opener. But I just put in you won't believe the Greco-Roman society, how they define family values. I mean, just the list of what they okayed would make the hair on your neck stand up. it is, but reading this book and looking at it as a history book, I'm saying to myself, we are moving
Very fast.
in that, like the Romans didn't agree with the Greeks, and finally they started not only agreeing but doing. Here we go.
Exactly.
And I'm telling you, you that are watching right now, and I appreciate what you know, who you are, and where you come from. I go out in my star-covered sky because I get up real early, and I pray out there, and I start out by saying, Lord, bring peace to Jerusalem and that nation. Protect them today, because we as Christians need to pray for the Jewish nation, and we need to stand up for them. When somebody is making some slide comment, we need to say, hold it. Hold it. You know, today it's like if you say homosexual, or if you say the N-word or whatever, I mean, it's like, and you know, those things are okay. But if you say something against the Jewish people, it's just a joke. You know, what are you so uptight about? We need to be, yes, protective. We need to let people know where we're coming from and why we're coming from that approach. Because the Judeo-Christian religion was put together so many hundreds of years ago by men that opened the Word of God and started, when they're preparing for the Constitution, they started writing on their knees. All of that was put together for that purpose. And we today, that's what I pray out in my front yard under the stars, Lord, how far we have come from the commandments that used to be allowed to hang on school walls. And thank goodness they're chiseled into the Supreme Court buildings, or otherwise they would remove them.
That's right.
Listen carefully. The video you're about to view will amaze you. It did me. I never imagined that Israel was like this. You always think of a pile of rubble and all these bombs going off and people constantly needing protection. You'll see Israel's vital contribution to the world. This is something that I had to be reminded of, because when I saw this video, I did not realize that we can thank Israel for much of our technology, much of the things we appreciate every day. In fact, what you're watching right now, a result of Israel. Please watch and stay tuned.
When people think about Israel, they think about war, or religion, or even falafel. But to me, when I think about Israel, I think of the triumph of the human spirit. Israelis, surrounded by enemies, have turned a desert with hardly any natural resources into a flourishing, productive, and caring society. My name is Tal Ben Shahar, and although I was born and bred in Israel, I spent much of my life living and working abroad. Working in Asia, studying in the US and the UK, and touring the world playing professional squash. I received my PhD from Harvard, and after completing my studies, I went on to teach there.
He teaches Harvard University's most popular class, Positive Psychology. Please welcome to the show, Tal Ben Shahar. Tal? Hello, sir.
It was very exciting to know that what I was thinking about, writing about, and teaching was having an impact. In spite of all this, I decided to move back to Israel. The main reason for this move, I would say, is family. The Israel I came back to was not the Israel I left. I was amazed at what happened here during the 14 years I was away. Israel had transformed. Israel had not only joined the 21st century, in many ways it was now leading the way.
When you look at the NASDAQ, companies are listed from around the world. There's one country, though, that truly stands out, and that is Israel.
Israel is the fastest growing, one of the most dynamic, entrepreneurial, and innovation-based economies on the planet.
The sky is the limit for inventors in Israel.
Israel has been a remarkable achiever in terms of technological innovation.
Israel has developed some of the world's leading technology.
Even if you don't live in Israel, chances are you have something that was made here.
If you just look at it on a daily basis, how much stuff do you use in your daily life that has its origins in Israel? It's rather remarkable.
Many of the microprocessors invented by Intel were designed in Israel.
Nowhere in the world outside of Silicon Valley will you find more technology startups.
People come from all over the world to look for Israeli technology.
Warren Buffett shelled out more than $4 billion for Iskar Metalworking, the largest purchase the legendary investor has made outside the United States.
I understand that their facilities are incredible, but I would expect that.
Intel developed here, HP as a center here, Google is very successful here, Microsoft as well as in research and development.
If you actually do the math, Microsoft is almost as much an Israeli company as we are a U.S. company.
This country has been such a beta site or a laboratory for solving both national and international problems since its inception.
The technology coming out of Israel is being used to connect the world, green the planet, save lives, and have fun.
Wow. Wow.
For instance, Kinect lets me use my body as the controller. This very cool technology was developed in Israel and then bought by Microsoft.
The workout.
In a way, Israel is known to everybody as a center of innovation, as a place where you can find more innovation than anywhere else in the world per capita.
If you look at countries that are represented in these stock exchanges, the ranking today is #1, of course, the United States. #2 is China, and #3 is Israel. The US, China, Israel. Looking at our size, how is it that Israel, with its 7 million people, has the third largest group of companies traded in New York?
This is an amazing fact for a tiny country to actually eclipse all the nations of Europe in the creativity of its entrepreneurial leadership.
We were living here in the middle of the desert. We really had no choice. We had to come with something in order to farm in this area.
One of the main reasons behind the Israelis' ability to lead in innovation, to bring about progress, is their resilience in the face of crucibles like these.
Necessity is the mother of invention. You know, when you look around, you got sand all over the place, and you got to start becoming creative.
If you look at just about every Israeli home, school, park, or farm, you'll notice something interesting. An innovative idea that makes the most of Israel's very limited water supply: drip irrigation.
People think that this is just a plain hose with a hole in it. This is not the case. Behind each hole, there's this very sophisticated dripper that is pressure compensated, that is self-cleaning, that has filters in it. There's a lot of technology and research and development and innovation, so it's certainly not just a hole in a pipe.
With drip irrigation, farmers can grow 40% more crops by using only half the regular amount of water. This has enabled Israelis to go from surviving in a desert to thriving as a leading exporter of fresh fruit and vegetables all around the world.
You know, when I travel and I see our irrigation systems in remote places, and I see how it helps people to grow more with less, I'm very proud of it.
At any given time, over 100 million people are confined to wheelchairs. And although wheelchairs have become more sophisticated, they've really been the only option.
Amit Gopher has the chutzpah to believe that he can change all that.
The initial idea was to make a device that will enable people to function from morning to night without the need of using wheelchair.
From medical myths to medical marvels, we head to Jerusalem to meet a paraplegic who's walking tall. It's a breakthrough you're going to have to see for yourself.
You are witnessing a miracle. The man you see standing up, walking, even climbing stairs, has been paralyzed for more than 20 years.
And never I think about I walk. Only the dream I walk.
When I see the impact of the device on a person, it gives me great pleasure.
Oh, it's the greatest thing. Cruising down the hallway. Oh, it's awesome. It's like it's been the best thing since the accident.
This country has become a country with all its imperfections that sees as part of its purpose looking out for other people.
The Bible says so. The Torah, the Jewish tradition talks about guiding and helping others.
That's the Jewish DNA. That's Israeli hardwiring. Also, religious or secular makes no difference.
I want to do something good, and not just for myself, but I wanted to do something good for Israel, for the society, and you know, it feels strange, but I think that it's also for the world.
You know, we're far from perfect, but we're in the game. Okay, we're in there fighting and helping and trying, and we're creating cures for cancer, and we're creating new, cool technology, and we're trying to feed the world. We're trying to solve dependence on oil. It really goes to the heart of what being an Israeli is about.
This is what Israel is all about. And to be back here, to be able to share it all with my family, this is what life is all about.
Today, Israel is threatened, perhaps more than at any other time in the last 3,000 years. Her struggles are our struggles. And now Israel needs us to step up on her behalf and ensure the fulfillment of her God-given destiny. Visit theisraelcourse.com, learn the story of the biblical heartland, and play a part in her continually unfolding story.